is Kevin Meagher, who joins us here on the Mother of All Talk Shows. Kevin, welcome back to
Evening,
the
George.
show. I promise you we'll come to the Northern Ireland situation, but I wondered if you were as unimpressed by the Conservative conference today and yesterday in Manchester as I have been.
It's been a very flat week at the governing party. Rishi Sunak's speech today, I don't think, caught the gravity of where the country finds itself. I think that's how I would start by summing it up. Sunak in power as Prime Minister for just 12 months after the dismal interregnum of his predecessor Liz Truss and the hiatus and the huge economic damage that was caused by her 49-day premiership last year. So this is Sunak setting his stall out as he saw it, introducing himself, Sunak the man as well. No, it was a fluent performance. You can't take that away from him. He's pretty fluent. But this was a pretty content-free address. As I say, given the gravity of the issues that the country faces, we're in a cost of living crisis. We've got negligible economic growth. He did actually at one point boast that Britain had the fastest growth in the G7, which is a classic in the kingdom of the blind. The one-eyed man is king. We've got 0.3% growth at the moment. So whoopee day. He didn't address the crisis in our public services, particularly in the National Health Service, where we've got 7 million people waiting for elective treatments. Partly as a backlog, obviously, of COVID, but actually the problem stems from huge chronic underinvestment in the NHS for the best part of the last 13, 14 years. Of course, that's the paradox. Sunak is the man who's the new face, if you like, but the Conservatives have been in power since May 2010, 13 years. So what Sunak was trying to pull off today, I think, was, if I can call it this, the John Major trick, which is, of course, John Major, as you will well know, George, replaced Mrs Thatcher after 11 years and went on 18 months later to win the 1992 general election. And I think Sunak's trying to do something similar, which is to say, we've had a long period where other people were running the show. You can't blame that on me. I'm a new face. Why don't you give me a chance? And that was very much, I think, the tenor of his pitch today, which is to try and emulate what John Major managed to pull off by winning the 1992 general election.
Well, I recall that general election, of course, very vividly, and John Major did poll the largest number of Conservative votes ever polled by anyone, including his rather more illustrious predecessors, Churchill, Thatcher. He beat them all. He did it with a soapbox, literally, and an old-fashioned coach, we used to call them. He's no John Major, though, is he?
He's not. I mean, Rishi Sunak is a bit of a curiosity. He's in that classic phrase, he's risen without trace. We could have a situation here where Rishi Sunak, having first been elected in 2015 to the House of Commons, leaves it by 2024 if he doesn't win the next general election. He's a classic global citizen. He was a non-dom in America for a period. He studied abroad. He's a man of means, clearly, and his wife is obviously super rich. So there's a slightly jarring tone when you address your party and, by definition, the country, and you've got nothing to say about the cost of living crisis that is crippling ordinary families in this country. Millions of people wondering by Christmas whether they're going to be turfed out of their homes because of high interest rates. We've got soar away problems with inflation, particularly food inflation and fuel inflation. And of course, the weather's starting to turn as well, which means we enter that very difficult period for the National Health Service as well. So as I say, the gravity of the problems that Britain faces, if you've been down from Mars and listened to Rishi Sunak speak for an hour in Manchester today, you would have thought, well, everything seems to be going pretty well in this place. And of course, that's very far from reality. And that, of course, is emphasised by the fact that his party is between 16 and 19 points behind in the opinion polls, and has been for quite some time. So this was, I think, for the Conservatives, a kind of make or break conference. We saw an awful lot of show ponying by some of Sunak's colleagues who are looking to succeed him potentially even next year. So there's a lot of ill discipline in the Conservative Party. Liz Truss, his predecessor, came and spoke to a packed room about her sort of radical thoughts on economic deregulation, which, as I say, nearly crippled the country last year. So she's not gone away, and some of his other colleagues are looking to succeed him as well. So it's a party in a bit of a mess, governing a country, I think, that is in a real mess. And as I say, I just don't think his address today, and I think it will start to unravel in coming days, was equal to the challenges that Britain faces.
Well, he's not Snow White, but the seven dwarves are there trying to succeed him. I lived in a time, Kevin, when 10 of Harold Wilson's cabinet would have been more than capable and highly recognisable to the public to succeed him in the afternoon. And most of them were trying to do just that almost every afternoon. I could rattle them off, but only you and I would remember them. This is a cabinet of dwarfs. I mean, if Liz Truss is regarded as a papabile, could be Pope again, then it's a very barren field, isn't it?
It is. It's extraordinarily weak. We seem to have an age now where cabinet ministers come and go, as I said, rise without trace often. Usually in my line of work, you track the form of the ponies to make sure you understand who they are and where they've come from. And it is a desperately unimpressive Conservative front bench. And of course, that's reflective of the fact that they've been in power for a very long time, and you end up basically at a point, particularly with junior ministers, where it becomes Buggins' turn. And that matters because, the longer you're in power, the less things work for you. You end up, in a sense, and this is where Sunak is a little bit today, repudiating your own government's past. He's trying to say today, look, this terrible sort of situation, he's gone on about politics is broken. And it's like, well, seriously, you've been in power for 13 years. Who's broken it? His two signature moves today, which were announced, over coming weeks again, because the centre is breaking down. These were well trailed because they were leaked. Was scrapping HS2, High Speed Rail 2, which is supposed to go from London Euston to Birmingham and then on to Manchester, and then it was supposed to go on to Sheffield and Leeds. Now, they scrapped one part of the Y route last year, and the assumption was that the route to Manchester was at least safe. And of course, that's what's been scrapped today. So Sunak has done this because he thinks it's a waste of money, or it's gobbling up too much public money. His predecessors, Boris Johnson, David Cameron, Theresa May, and George Osborne, who was Chancellor, of course, for the first 6 years of this Conservative government, implacably opposed to scrapping HS2. So Sunak's here kind of repudiating what his own party has done in government. I think that's a very dangerous moment for a party government to kind of say, we've kind of gone around in a big circle and we're going to go again in a completely different direction. It talks about the lack of intellectual coherence, I think, that afflicts the Conservative Party at the moment. You've got lots of strands, right-wing populism. You've got a kind of one nation tradition that's trying to reassert itself, and you've got managerial MBA Rishi Sunak, who sort of comes along and sort of says, "Let me try and fix problems and run things a bit better." Except, he said a few months ago that he had 5 key priorities: reducing inflation, interest rates, growing the economy, sorting out the NHS, and the small boats issue with migrants coming across the English Channel. And on pretty much any one of those measures, he's miles away at the moment. Now, inflation will start to fall back naturally because of international factors, so it's not really anything to do with him. And again, these 5 totemic policy achievements that he's asked us to measure him against barely were mentioned in this speech today. There's very little about the economy, very little about his government's record. I mean, it's amazing, really, that he managed to pad this out for 60 minutes. But he did manage to do that. But I sense it will start to unravel because, I mean, the key thing was this issue about HS2, which he says by cancelling the route from Birmingham to Manchester, it will save £36 billion. Obviously, an awful lot of money. Now, he's saying he will reinvest that in local services and local transport priorities, rail and road. across the North and the Midlands. The only problem is he starts rattling off in his speech places that are likely to benefit. But some of these places have already been previously announced. It's the classic thing of bundling together and repackaging something you've already announced. And again, that's the hallmark of a government that's lost kind of internal coherence and doesn't really have an awful lot to say for itself and to give people a real justification for voting for them for another 5 years. And I think that is what today will symbolise, that the cupboard is empty in terms of solid policy ideas. There's nothing in his speech about housing. There's nothing about perhaps changing the planning system to speed up infrastructure projects in the future. There's nothing about how he's going to support families through this winter as well. He's just kind of hoping that inflation falls over the winter, as I say, because mainly of international factors, and that then eases some of the cost of living pressures and also some of the industrial disputes, which again were not mentioned at all in his speech. There's a real sense of malaise in Britain at the moment. Nothing seems to work. You phone up at 8 o'clock to try and get a GP's appointment and you're 30th in the queue. You go to A&E, you stood there for 6 hours. You can't catch a train because we've got industrial disputes. And if we didn't, the train services are terrible anyway. So the real sense of kind of malaise. And this is the difficulty. That when you've been in power a very long time, who's to blame for the state of the country? Plausibly. And this is why I think we'll see next week at the Labour conference a real emphasis on
we'll have plenty. Yeah, we'll have plenty to say about the Labour conference, I assure you. Nero fiddled while Rome burned. It seems the Conservatives were disco dancing. I saw an extraordinary video of Priti Patel, remember her, bopping with Nigel Farage to "I Can't Take My Eyes Off You." They couldn't take their eyes off Farage, could they? Do you see any possibility that he'll be back into the Tory party?
It's a perfect metaphor, because I think certainly for the Conservative grassroots, they look at Nigel Farage and see a kind of lost prince. They see somebody who personifies and embodies their kind of politics, which is not only just about Brexit, but is this kind of buccaneering style of politics where there's a bit of swagger and a bit of assuredness. And when they measure Farage against, as you say, the kind of cabinet of pygmies and the kind of Rishi Sunak, who's the embodiment of managerial politics, they look at Farage and think, actually, we prefer a blast of the old religion. We prefer somebody that can actually put a few words together and speaks from the heart and leads from the front. So Farage, is welcomed, as I say, like the proverbial lost prince at this conference, albeit by all accounts not huge numbers of people on the ground at this conference, which is quite striking. But in a sense, his job is done, because he's managed to influence British politics to such a degree that the mainstream, really, of the Conservative Party dances to his tune. And in a sense, his work is done. So I'd be very surprised if he ever took up the offer of a plush, safe seat to get into the House of Commons, because in some respects, the stage is too small for him, given the impact that he's had on British politics in the last 10 years.
Yeah, I understand that feeling. Kevin, what about poor Northern Ireland, left with the DUP against the world? What's going to happen there?
Well, everything is going to hinge on the next 3 weeks. There's a meeting tomorrow night of the DUP's, the Democratic Unionist Party's officer class, where we're told that Jeffrey Donaldson, the leader of the DUP, and he has many supporters that I think recognise that the boycotting of the Northern Ireland Assembly and Executive is a counsel of despair. It doesn't lead anywhere for unionism. And I think they would rather go back in at this stage with a few more concessions that the British government can perhaps winkle out of the position that it's got, because it can't do very much about the DUP's core demands, scrapping the Windsor Framework or the Northern Ireland Protocol as was. That ship has sailed, and I think the DUP kind of liberals, if I can put it like that, it's perhaps an oxymoron, liberal DUP types, but I think they recognise, we can't just hang outside because we've got an NHS that's crashing. We're getting the blame for the collapsing public services and one thing and another. It's going to lead to political repercussions at some point. So they've got this officer class meeting tomorrow, and they're 120 key people, and I think Donaldson is going to try and float across. Look, we need to try and think seriously about how the choreography how we go back in. Now, in a couple of weeks' time, on Friday the 13th, so obviously what could go wrong, it's the DUP's annual conference, and I think that's the crunch point, because I think what we'll see is the British government try and, as I say, confect a little bouquet of micro measures that might allow Donaldson to say, look, we've managed to win some more concessions from this Windsor framework. We now have to own these, and we need to go back in. Because what happens then in a week and a half after that is the US-led investment conference that President Biden has organised and promised when he was over in Northern Ireland in May for the Good Friday Agreement celebrations. Now, it would be, I think, a perverse outcome if you ended up with US investors, possibly with checkbooks open, metaphorical checkbooks open, looking to invest, and there is nobody running Northern Ireland for them to meet. And it's a humiliation for Northern Ireland, but really this would be a humiliation for Rishi Sunak, because in 18 months' time, if the opinion polls are correct and Rishi Sunak is on a hiding to nothing and he's booted out, Rishi Sunak is going to be looking for an international job of some sort. And he's going to want to go to President Biden, assuming President Biden is still there or his administration. And if he can say, look, I delivered Northern Ireland a restoration and I managed to fix that problem, that puts him in possibly in a reasonable position. If he can't deliver, then he's the man who can't deliver. And the one thing American politicians abhor is people who can't deliver. And so I think there's a lot of pressure behind the scenes from the top of British politics to say to Jeffrey Donaldson and the DUP leadership, this is crunch time. Carrying on this boycott leads absolutely nowhere. And if we don't get the restoration of the Assembly and the Executive, the British government will start to deal with the Irish government, and we will have some kind of joint stewardship of Northern Ireland, which the Unionists will hate as well. So that they're in this situation where the position they're in is not great, but their position can get worse. And of course, one of the provisos in the Good Friday Agreement is the border poll, is the referendum on Northern Ireland's constitutional status. And I think what starts to happen is if Northern Ireland is seen to be a place that cannot function, that timeline about when we get to that border poll just gets nearer and nearer. So the DUP and Unionists are in a kind of, they can't win here because the border poll gets nearer. Joint stewardship of some sort starts to take shape if Northern Ireland can't succeed. And this boycott, this nearly 2-year boycott of the Assembly and the Executive has led nowhere. All it's done is see public services in Northern Ireland decimated and decline. And as I say, they're starting to get the blame for that. So Donaldson's a realist. He's been around Westminster a long time. He can see that actually the ground beneath their feet is crumbling. So I think he probably wants to fight to do a deal, but he needs some support to get across that line. So it's up to the Northern Ireland office, number 10, the leadership of the DUP, to do what they need to do in terms of the choreography to get this across the line, get Stormont back up and running just before the Americans touch down on their plane. And I think it's achievable, because I think the stakes of not making this happen are so great for everybody that I think the reality will bite.